गाडी सर
काही लोक जॉईन व्हायला थोडा
लाईव्ह लिंक देऊन ठेवा गाडी सर.
ओके
मॅडम shall we start?
एक मला वाटतं 2 मिनिटं थांबावं, आत्ताच चालू केलंय ना आणि 11ची वेळ आहे. आपला जस्ट 1 मिनिट आणि 1.5 मिनिटांनी सुरू केलं तरी होऊन जातं.
ठीक आहे.
ते मलाही मेसेज येतात की लिंक पाठवा वगैरे, ते काय ते बघायला लागेल. झाले असतील ना जॉईन आता लोक?
हो, वेळ तर झाली आपली.
चला सुरू करू.
11 वाजले, सुरू करूया आपण.
हो, येस येस.
Good morning to all. I am Professor Gautam Kamble, Director School of Social Sciences, Punnishlo Kailadevi Holkar, Solapur University, Solapur, and convener of this international webinar. Honorable Vice Chancellor Madam, Dr. Mrinalini Phadnavis of this university. Today's speaker, Sri Achyut Godbole sir. Professor S.A. Suryanshi, In charge Director, School of Earth Sciences. Organizing Secretary of this webinar, Dr. Dhulap sir. Other organizing committee members, technical staff, Dr. Raut sir, Sri Gardi sir, and all the participants from India and abroad. On behalf of Punnishlo Kailadevi Holkar, Solapur University, Solapur, Maharashtra, India, I welcome you all for this international webinar on climate change and rural development in COVID-19. This is the third special lecture from this webinar series. And today's our speaker, Sri Achyut Godbole sir, will talk on present crisis in economy and ecology. I think this is a very important topic in today's economic scenario, not only in India but also at global level. For this webinar, I already said that the participant number last before today. Now the current status of the registration participant is more than 1100, and out of that 1500 countries participants are registered for this webinar. From the last 2 days, more than 2300 viewers are visited to our YouTube link, and I think this is the very good success rate of the last 2 days. And I think that this number will continually increasing in the coming days also. Now today is Sunday, and we know that our Godbole sir is a speaker, and this is an intellectual treat to all to Solapur or Maharashtra and India and abroad also. Once again, I welcome you all for this webinar. Now I request to Dr. Prakash Vankade sir, please give introduction to our today's speaker, Dr. Godbole sir. Prakash Vankade sir, please.
Thank you, Kamble sir. Good morning to all dignitaries of the national webinar, my colleagues and dear participants. This is Dr. Prakash Vankade, It's an honor and privilege to introduce today's chief guest, Achyut Godbole sir, world-renowned expert in software programming, management, science, mathematics, psychology, philosophy, economics, environment and ecology, music, and whatnot. Sir started showing such talent at the very young age. He got 16th rank in SSC exam and first in the university. He scored 100 marks in almost all exams in mathematics from first standard to IIT. He is a chemical engineer from IIT Mumbai. He has 32 years of experience in developing software and managing software companies. He has traveled all over the globe more than 150 times for the IT business. He has contributed to the multifold growth of the companies such as Patni, Sintel, L&T, Infotech, Apar, and Disha, while working at the highest level such as CEO, EMD, and ED. He has written 4 technical books on operating system, data communication and networks, web technology, and demystifying computers, published by Tata McGraw-Hill. Many books are translated in Chinese language now that are used as a reference books. He has written popular best-selling books in 33 best-selling books in Marathi, संगणक युग, बोर्ड रूम, नादवेद, किम्यागार, अर्थात गुलाम, थैमान चंगळयुगाचे, ज्ञानोदय, स्टीव जॉब्स, मनात, मुसाफिर, गणिती, झपूर्जा, कॅनव्हास, लाईमलाईट, and so many books which have written by the Godbole sir. He has written popular columns Tantra Mantra, Udyaचे जग, वैद्य कायम, प्राणी जगत, विज्ञानवाद, Infotech. He was awarded for his books Nadved, Kimyagar, Nanoday, Manat by the state government. He has given speeches on science, technology, management, music, literature, economics, mathematics in English and Marathi on TV, radio, and many conferences worldwide, which have been become extremely popular. By looking into his contribution, Sir was honored with a various prestigious awards like Distinguished Alumni by IIT. He was awarded twice by the Prime Minister for excellent performance of his company in software export. Udyog Ratna Award, Kumar Gandharva Award by Pandit Bhimsen Joshi, Sahyadri Navratna Award, Indradhanu Award, Dr. Parnekar Award for contribution to economics, Sonapat Dandekar Puraskar for contribution to psychology by Maharashtra Sahitya Parishad, Nachi Kelkar Puraskar for contribution in nanotechnology, Uttung Jivan Gaurav Puraskar by AIT Pune, Lapsetwar Puraskar, Samaj Shikshak Puraskar, Jan Kalyan Samiti Puraskar for contribution to IT business and other fields, Padmakar Dev Spruti Gaurav Puraskar and Sahitya Parishad Puraskar for Manakallol. He was participated in delivering TEDx lecture on information technology in Goa. He was the president of Yuva Natya Sahitya Sammelan held in 2011. He was a chief guest at the function of Bruhan Maharashtra Mandal USA held in Los Angeles in 2015. Again, a similar function in London in 2017, and again a chief guest at the same function in Sydney, Australia. He has contributed to building Ashiana, a school in Mumbai for mentally challenged children with about 40 autistic children. He is currently managing director of Soft Excel Consultancy. With this word, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vankade sir. Now I request to our today's speaker, Achyut Godbole sir. So please start your speech on present crisis on economy and ecology. Over to you, sir.
Please unmute yourself, sir. Godbole sir, you are not audible.
सर म्यूट केले सरांना म्यूट झालंय सरांचं
हो हो सांगितलं त्यांना करता येते. Just uncheck the mic option, sir.
एक माईक सारखं आयकॉन असेल त्याला
ओके
आपल्याला
ओके
हे
ओके
हा.
ऐकू येतंय का आता?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please
Okay,
proceed.
am I audible now? Okay. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me to speak on this very important subject. And I think it's a important juncture that we're discussing this topic. Important because not just about because of COVID, but also because of the crisis in economy and ecology that we're facing right now, and we're likely to face in the years to come. Uh, Let me just give you some idea and background about this. I mean, we are currently facing an economic crisis which is, in fact, which can be compared to the Great Depression of 1930s in America and all over the world, in fact. 2008, into 2008, we saw a great recession. And to 1929-30, we saw Great Depression in the United States, and it actually spread in Europe and many other countries. Today's recession or today's economic crisis actually can be compared with the Great Depression. It's somewhere in between 2008's Great Recession and the Great Depression. I'll explain what that means. In fact, current crisis is a double whammy. I mean, and I'll explain these terms. It's a demand and supply both. I mean, it's a demand side problem and supply side problem both. And I'll explain what that means. In 1929-30, in terms of economics, if the rate of GDP growth decreases, rate of growth decreases, it is slowdown. I mean, supposing we were growing at 8%, but now we're growing at 6%, it is slowdown. But if GDP rate of growth becomes negative, which means our GDP actually starts going down, then it becomes recession. And especially when it continues for 6 consecutive months, then it is theoretically called as recession. So we must know what is called as recession. And if it actually continues for a far longer period and goes far deeper, then it is called as Great Depression, which is what happened in 1929-30. What happens in recession or depression or slowdown? I mean, as I've said, the degrees differ, but mainly the demand falls. It's a demand side problem. People don't have money to buy the goods that are there in the marketplace. Why do they not have money to buy? And that's one of the reasons. There are several reasons, and right from Joseph Schumpeter to several people have actually given reasons of why there are ups and downs, and in the economy. Karl Marx has given his explanation. One of the reasons why these happen, one of the reasons and main reasons, is inequality in the society. If there is a large amount of inequality in our society, then the majority of the population does not have enough money or wherewithal to buy the goods in the market that are available. And of course, it's a little complicated, capital goods and consumer goods and the proportion, who buys what, etc. But I won't go into that sort of economic fundamentals. The point one is trying to say is, if the inequality is enormous, then majority of the people don't have enough money to buy the goods in the marketplace. Today, for instance, we have tremendous inequality, tremendous. I mean, for instance, and I'll come to that point a little later, but give you some statistics. 1% of Indian the population has wealth which is more than four times the wealth of the lowest 70% of people. That is as per Oxfam, the latest report. 9 people in India have more wealth than lowest 50% of population. I mean, that kind of inequality, which obviously means that majority of the people don't have money enough to buy the goods that are available in the marketplace. Now, what happens? The goods lie idle. If the goods lie idle, then the industrial class, okay, the capitalist class thinks that there's no point in producing more. So they shut factories, throw people out of work, then unemployment increases. Therefore, the purchasing power of the society decreases, and therefore, again, the market is flooded with goods which can't be sold, which means there's production and people can't buy it, which means there's a demand problem. There's no demand for goods. Then again, more factories close down, more unemployment, and so on and so forth. And therefore, obviously, GDP goes down. And that's why there is slowdown. and the slowdown continues for, in fact, to such an extent that GDP goes down, then there is recession. If it continues for 6 months, then it's recession, and it is very deep, then it is Great Depression. So I think that's the whole basis. There were various remedies proposed for this. One of the remedies was obviously to reduce the interest rate. Typically monetarist economists, think about this, to reduce the interest rate. If you reduce the interest rate, what happens? Then the middle class actually thinks that I can actually now buy television and PCs and laptops and washing machines and cars and houses at lower interest. So if I reduce the interest rate from, let's say, 8% to 6% or 6% to 4%, then there'll be more people who will take loans from the banks and buy goods from the marketplace, which is why the demand will increase. But interest actually works both ways. Interest is not only reduced for consumers to buy consumer goods, but interest also is reduced for industrialists who take loans from banks to invest in the industries. Which means that when the interest rate is reduced, the consumer demand increases, and industrialists also will come forward because interest rate is lower, and therefore they think that I can now take money on loan, and then invest in industries and produce goods which the market demands because of the increased demand due to the low interest rate and so on. So that's why if you reduce the interest rate, the industries will produce more, the consumers will buy more, and the problem will be solved. This was a solution which monetarists offer. But there is another school, which is Keynesian school, which thinks that in a case of a recession or Great Depression, I mean, monetary policies can work for very small amount of disturbances. But if the demand problem is very severe, the monetary policies actually do not work, and therefore you need to have government intervention. Therefore, government must spend enough money to, Manrega is one example, for instance. So when government spends a lot of money on various schemes, then many people are employed, the workers get employment, then there's a lot of money in the hands of the poor and also middle class, and they go and buy goods from the marketplace, and demand increases. When the demand increases, the industrialist thinks that, oh, there's a demand, so let me start the factories again, and therefore there's more employment, and then so on and so forth. Therefore the cycle can be reversed. This was a fiscal measure as against monetarist measure, as was suggested by Keynesian economists. Now, the problem was that the current problem, for instance, is demand and supply both, which essentially means that there is no demand in the marketplace and there is also no supply. Supply means there is no money in the hands of the industrialists. Now, we must differentiate here between big industrialists. I mean, the Tatas and Ambanis and so on, they obviously have money. A lot of big industrialists have money, but there are a lot of industrialists actually do not want to invest in India as much as they want to invest abroad, by the way. I mean, that's another story that we'll probably not discuss right now. But the small and medium scale industries have actually no money. Due to COVID, and also before COVID, by the way, the SMEs do not have enough money. Banks do not give enough loans to small and medium scale industries as much as they do to larger banks, and that has been a skewed kind of treatment that banks have shown to to various classes. They always favor the big corporates, they always favor the big banks and so on, or big industries, but they do not give loans, or if they give loans, there are a lot of conditions and so on and so forth. So the small and medium scale industries have a lot of problems. They don't have money. So there's a supply problem. Supply problem means that industrialists don't have money, and demand problem means the people don't have money to buy. I mean, that's as simple as that. Today's problem is both, and I think that is why it is very difficult to solve. In COVID times, for instance, England and Germany and several countries actually solved it in a very interesting fashion. What they said was, to their companies, was that the government said we will provide you with money, to the companies, by the way, solving the supply side problem, but on the condition that you pay your workers, you continue paying your workers, don't sack them, pay them maybe 80% of the wages, maybe 60%, but continue their employment. And that's why in Germany and in UK and several countries, by the way, there was no mass exodus, so mass sort of crisis as we saw in India. In India, people were thrown out of jobs. The landlords threw people out of their houses, and therefore there was a huge crisis of migrant labor. And crores of people went from cities to the villages because they didn't find jobs at all. I think what we need to do is to give money to small and medium scale industries on the condition that they pay their workers. If that was done, that had been done, then we could have averted the crisis of migrants to a large extent. And of course, there were other reasons too, and we won't like to go into why that crisis arose and how it could have been averted, etc. But I think the important thing is to solve the problem of demand and supply both, and in that the government can play a role. Now, let me come to the bigger element. Today in the United States, the crisis is very deep. I mean, there's an economist called Richard Wolff, and I would urge all of you to visit his site and view the videos, watch his videos. Richard Wolff, he was an economist in Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and he actually gives this superb analysis of the current situation. There's an enormous amount of disparity in America today. The unemployment is literally around, I guess, around 40%, if I'm not mistaken. It is huge. At the time of Great Depression in 1929, it was only 25%, only 25%, which is very high. But now it is 40%. It is very high. Or the working population. And there is, when the government started, the Roosevelt started the program of giving money to poor or unemployed, and started invest. They actually started various schemes similar to Manrega here, but actually on a far bigger scale there, and creating a lot of power and several schemes, roads, etc., and employed thousands of workers. In fact, 1.5 crore or something workers, right? And therefore, crores of families were supported, thereby creating demand. But they also created at that time unemployment benefits. They created pension schemes and several other schemes, which is why today America is not completely collapsed. By the way, if those schemes had not been started at that time, today America would have been finished completely, because it's only because of these schemes that these are actually just sort of floating around, I must say. I'm sure you know that on the 31st of August, the unemployment benefit and all the various schemes that people were getting was going to get over, and Trump had to sign a special scheme to grant $400 and so on, which is yet to be passed by the Congress, and they're still facing a lot of problems. But I think that we won't go into. The point is, why have we come to this pass? Why is the world so unequal? And there we need to go into the details of globalization. Today, the whole world is facing enormous amount of inequality. It's not just because of COVID. The pre-COVID, I'll come to COVID towards the end, but I think before COVID itself, the world was actually ruled by what I have called in my book as neoliberal capitalism. It's not just the regular capitalism as Adam Smith had envisaged, that there are thousands of people competing to produce a product, and because there is infinite competition, the cost of the price of the product will be the lowest and quality will be the highest, and most of the people will be able to buy, and it will not only be very good for the society, but also users and consumers and so on. That is what the picture that Adam Smith had envisaged. That never actually came into reality in any. Monopolies developed immediately, and then the free trade or free trade never came into existence. The trade was always unfree. We are told by 9 o'clock debates on the television that we believe in free trade. The trade has never been free. By the way, the entire development of the United States and Europe is actually because of in fact unfree, and the trade which was biased towards benefiting them. And there's an excellent economist, South Korean economist in Oxford University, who's written several books about this. I think excellent documentation. So I think the point is that today we're living in an enormously unequal world. Why did this happen? From 1929, there was a Great Depression. Uh, Ultimately, the Second World War created demand. Because of the war situation, there were several shoes and trousers and tanks and guns and so on had to be manufactured. Apart from various other goods, and therefore employment increased. There was almost full employment, and from 45 to 73, there was good amount of progress. GDP rose by 2.8% on the average. There was almost zero unemployment. There were no bubbles, of recession and growth, and there was hardly any terrorism at that time. There were wars, of course. There was Korean War in 1951 and so on and so forth. But I think from 1945 to 1973, there was, of course, Vietnam War. But 1945 to 73 is called as the golden age of capitalism because there were very few crises of capitalism. Inequality was the lowest, and so on. But in 1973, there was oil crisis, and during the 1970s decade, the rate of profit dropped. The profitability of industries actually was reduced in American industries and European industries. Now, if you want to increase the profitability, there were two or three major things that they needed to do. One is to reduce the cost of production, and secondly, to find out markets where they can sell their goods. If they could do both in one shot, they could solve the problem of the reduced profitability of American and European industries. And they found that solution in globalization. They outsourced their manufacturing to China. They outsourced their services to India. That is IT, banking, stock market, insurance, and so on. And China created a manufacturing hub for the whole world, and America and Europe outsourced their manufacturing to China. And therefore, they reduced the cost of production. But while doing that, they created a middle class in China, India, Vietnam, and several countries that they outsourced. Because I'll give an example. If a programmer, an American company had to pay $100 for a programmer per hour, $100 per hour in America. In India, they had to pay, the offshore center charges only $30. So it's a great amount of cost reduction for the American company. But $30 per hour also is very high as compared to what mechanical, electrical, or computer engineers used to get before outsourcing had started. And therefore, all people started flocking towards computer science, and the hundreds of engineering colleges started emerged and mushroomed, and we know what happened after 1990 onwards. And therefore, what happened was that a middle class was created because of globalization in India, China, and several other places. In India, for instance, 10 to 15 crore or 10 to 15% of the people benefited out of globalization. Several went to America. Those who remained in India also had their salaries, they saw their salaries actually increase many folds. And then these people created demand for goods which the Americans and Europeans wanted to create. Because these people started buying washing machines and TVs and PCs and soft drinks and fast food and cars and all the Italian marbles and so on and so forth. I mean, so the point is that this created demand that they were looking for. You look at any good today, there's a lot of foreign content. One of the reasons why our rupee rate is very low is that even we export, out of exports, there's a huge import content. Unless we import, we can't export. It's not that we manufacture a lot of things in India without importing and then export. Our rupee would have been very strong otherwise. But that's not true. Our import bill is very, very high, not just because of oil, but many other goods. And therefore, it created a middle class which started buying houses and cars and TVs and so on and so forth. And therefore, America and Europe, they could avert the crisis and they could improve the profitability. But even then, the profitability did not improve to the extent that they wanted it to be improved. And therefore, they said, we want the financial field to be liberalized. And therefore, they put pressure on India. Of course, 1991 we had a crisis and we had to go to IMF and take loans and so on, and they put conditions on us, and they made us liberalize our financial system, which means that now an American industry can invest in Indian share market. Instead of only investing in New York stock market, they could come here, invest in Infosys and TCS and so on and so forth. The reason being is that because of this outsourcing, the GDP of these countries was growing at much faster rate than it was growing in America. The stock market also was growing at much faster rate than in America or Europe. So they said, why not take advantage of this? I'll invest in a company in India. When the rate goes up, the share price goes up, I'll withdraw and take away the money. And this was called as FII, foreign institutional investor. There are two kinds of investments. One is FDI, foreign direct investment. The second is FII. So FII started increasing, and we started getting huge amount of money in our share market. And while you invest money in Infosys or any other Indian share market, the company has to change dollars. So they have to sell dollars to RBI, and RBI gives money, rupees to this company, and then they invest in the Indian share market, which is why the demand for rupees increased, and therefore the price of rupee actually increased. In fact, there's a great pressure on Indian economic policymakers to keep this share market afloat, because if these people withdraw their money, if these people actually take away their money from the share market, the value of the rupee will actually fall enormously. So that's the point. Now, what happened because of globalization? Because of globalization, three things happened. One is, that, as I've said, 10 to 15 crores of people, middle class and higher middle class and so on and so forth, actually were benefited. We all belong to that class, because the government then came up with the fifth and sixth and seventh salary revisions and so on for the government employees, and therefore they benefited. Engineers benefited. They had more money to buy and more money to spend. Therefore, several entertainment industry grew. Doctors started charging higher fees because people could afford. The middle class could afford. So basically the middle class was created. But the remaining 60, 70, 80% of the people did not benefit at least as much as they should have. And that is the crisis. That there's a book by Stiglitz called Making Globalization Work. I think all of us should read that book, Making Globalization Work. But the way we have accepted globalization was one-sided, and that because of patent laws, and there are several things that Stiglitz explains, and there are several people who have done this. But because of neoliberal globalization, I'm going to discuss in the next 30 minutes. The three things were unemployment, inequality, and climate change. That is, the pollution. And these three are the main the things that are created by this monster of neoliberal capitalism. And there is, because of COVID, it is aggravated to an extent that it's extremely difficult to get out of this unless we think restructuring of the socio-economic system. That is the point that I want to bring home. I think it's very important. We have to think out of the box. We cannot be thinking about. Many people ask me, when will it come back to normal? I said, where was the normal? Because even before COVID, there was no normal. When there's and therefore now I would like to start my slides now. Can you just put up the first slide, please? Yeah, next. Next. Now here is some statistics. World's 26 people have more wealth than lowest 50%. 9 persons in India have more wealth than lowest 50%. 1% controls more than 4 times wealth of 70%. In India, 30% have negligible wealth, and 92% have wealth which is actually should be less than or equal to 7.3 lakh. Should not be more than, should be less than 7.3 lakh. Just imagine, land, house, fixed deposit, bank, gold, all that put together, 7.3 lakhs. 92% of less than that wealth, which means that even a small illness will actually put you into indebtedness lifelong. Next, please. Next, please. Before that, I think you skipped one. Only 1% of wealth generated in India in 2015 to 20 went to low. Only 1% of wealth generated in last 5 years went to lowest 50%. Top 1% got 73% of wealth generated during the same period. Please understand. Between 2006 to 20, the several billionaires in India grew in multifold. And during the same period, the income of the workers increased by only 2% per year. Next, please. This is all official data. Percentage of total wealth with top 1% people between year. How much wealth do 1% control? In 2000, 36%, 2014, 49%, 2015, 53%, 2017, 58.4%, 20, more than 70. So I think it is very clear that inequality is increasing enormously and not decreasing. Next, please. But well, this just to give you some, around 65% of the families earn less than rupees 10,000 rupees per month. This is official data. Now, 10,000, a family of five, by the way, family of five, food, housing, uh, uh, water, electricity, entertainment, education, health, I mean, travel and marriages and so on. A family of five, 10,000 rupees or less, 65%. And 82.5% earn less than rupees 20,000 per month. This is last year's, I think, or maybe year before 2018 or maybe 2019 beginning. So maybe it would have increased a little bit, but in COVID times, it would have even reduced than this anyway. So this is a kind of status. Next, please. Now, just to give you an idea, Manusmriti says that the minimum wage and the highest wage, the ratio should not be more than 1 to 4. Even Manusmriti says that. A Stanford survey says it should not be more than 1 to 18. Paul Krugman, a Nobel laureate, says that it shouldn't be at most it should be 1 to 100 at most. And after that, he says that democracy collapses and so on. But in India, the average is more than 800. Yeah, the average is more than 800. Next, please. Unemployment. Now, what is this? Next. Unemployment rate as of 2019 is 8.1% as per CMI, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. This is only organization that actually gives out some figures. Government has stopped giving us some figures. By the way, let me just tell you, just clarify. I don't belong to any political party, by the way. This is not to say that this has happened only in BJP's time or something. In fact, it started in 1991. I am against a socio-economic system of neoliberalism. So basically, my what all I'm trying to portray is because of the system that this has been created. Not because there always one party sort of accuses another party accuses the first, and I'm not interested in that kind of debate at this juncture. I think it's a system that is important, and we need to be aware of where we are today. Because all the time these figures are not told to us. In fact, all the TV in the 9 o'clock debates on television should be on these things. But all the entire day we are fed with absolute nonsense all the time. There's a CID giddy that is going on the television, actually talking about who killed whom and all that kind of stuff, or whatever, some religious thing or some whatever. I think there are several things that are important, and this has been going on for years from all parties. So I have nothing to do with any party, but this is I'm talking from a point of a system. Now, youth unemployment is 16%, and youth women unemployment rate is close to 25%. 50% of youth below 25 years seeking jobs. Today, maybe even higher because not very many have jobs. India ranking 188th out of 189 countries in labor participation rate. I don't think I should explain. People labor participation rate actually talks about people who are employed and people who are seeking employment put together. So India ranks 180th out of 189. Next, please. Now 77. The first three slides you can skip. All one is trying to say is out of the people who are working, approximately 40% of the people don't get jobs to their liking. 40 to 50% of the people. The reason, let me explain in a minute. The reason is that we live in a world where the enormous amount of work uh, division of labor. For instance, a simple Apple uh, iPad has hundreds of parts. I don't know whether we are aware, hundreds of parts, and they are all manufactured in different countries. According to Ricardian principle, unlike complete self-reliance, you should produce only something that you are best at, where you can produce something at the lowest cost and the highest quality. You should only produce those goods and export, and import those goods where you are not good at. And that's the basic principle, in fact, of globalization. In fact, it was put forward by Ricardo in his famous principle called comparative cost theory. Now, that theory had, obviously, there was good and had limitations. But the point is, iPad has hundreds of parts manufactured in different countries. They all travel from different distances and then come to different countries. One of the main countries in China, and then they're assembled, and then those are sent to hundreds of countries. Now, in a particular country, if you're manufacturing one part of that iPad, you don't even know for whom you're producing. Whatever you're doing, where does it, what is the role of what you're doing in the final product? You don't have control over who produces, for whom, with what technology, at what price, leave alone getting a piece of the profit. So I think that creates what is very classically called by Karl Marx as alienation. And I mean, it creates, if you see modern times of Charlie Chaplin, there's one person doing the same job again and again and again and again, and without knowing why one is doing that job. And I think that's why these are the reasons. There are several other reasons, but one of the reasons is that at least half the people who, and this is a survey by UNHDR, United Nations, by the way. The second survey is by ILO, International Labour Organization. Billions of people, that is, the second one says 140 crore. The first one says 77.5% of the working population, which is a little higher. But my estimate is around 40% of the people who are working today in the world, 40 to 50%, don't have decent jobs. In India, lost 1 crore per year. In India, we lost jobs at the rate of almost 1 crore per year from 2000 onwards. This is according to CMI. Earlier also, we used to lose jobs, by the way. Again, this has been going on for years. Now, the last point is very important. When GDP increases by 10%, employment increases only by 1%, according to Aziz Premji University. At 9 o'clock, debates on all television channels ad infinitum and ad nauseum, you hear the comment, we must increase the GDP because we want to increase employment. That is complete nonsense, because if you increase GDP by 10%, employment increases only by 1%, by the way. I think it's not just the GDP, but what kind of GDP, using what technology, at what locations, and what do you produce? I think the main problem with our production system, or the the way we produce, is that we produce only for the top 10 to 15%. We produce basically luxury goods, as I've said, cars and shampoos and all that we see in the malls today, or things that are required for household, various right, for Italian marbles to ACs and hundreds of things, or microwaves and refrigerators and so on and so forth. So we obviously manufacture basically goods which are required for the 10 to 15%, 20% of the population. In cities, they are not spread over, by the way. In Maharashtra, for instance, there's Bombay, there's Pune, Nasik, Aurangabad, slightly, but there are hundreds of other places where you could set up industries. In fact, information technology, which was essential for death of distance, you could do IT from anywhere. Why not IT from IT Kolhapur and Solapur and even Nagpur, for that matter, and hundreds of other places, or even UP? And but you've actually killed 8 cities because of information technology. Killed. Bombay, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, Delhi, you have actually just massacre. Because for a city to be good city, for a decent city, there are certain criteria. For 10 million, for 1 million people or 1 lakh of people, there have to be so many hospitals, there have to be so many schools, there have to be so many pavements, there's so many car parks, so many gardens, so many uh, playgrounds, and so many fire brigades and hundreds of things. So there's a yardstick, there is a now because of the IT influx in these cities, IT and banking and so on, all the middle class, they wanted houses nearby. And therefore, obviously, builders put pressure, and then FSI was increased, and all the cities grew vertically. By all the other things remaining almost the same. I mean, if you go to various cities, it's not that the population of the city grew 1.5 times, and so did the gardens and playgrounds, and that didn't happen. So that's why there's a huge burden. That's why the enormous number of cars increase, and there's a traffic jam at every corner. And when there's a traffic jam, the solution that our planners find is to build a flyover. If you have an excellent public transportation system, you won't have traffic jams in the first place. But you need to cater to the car industry. That's what neoliberalism is for. Because neoliberalism caters to the corporate sector and the top 10 to 15% of the population. It does not care for the last 70-80% of the population. That is a fundamental reason why I'm talking to you today. I think it's a paradigm shift that we need to make in the way we work. And next, please. Okay. Now we have ignored and neglected health and education. Now let me just before we start the statistics, let me just tell you why this happens. Or actually, let me just talk about it a little later. In 2018, 3.3 lakh pregnant women died, 830 per day, 1 lakh childbirths, etc. The same figures for China. See, 1 lakh childbirth per 1 lakh childbirths, 130 mothers die. But understand this, for the same figure for China is 56, Sri Lanka is 60. I'm deliberately taking these. 46, Australia 5.5, Sweden 4.4, and many advanced countries 7 to 9. And in our country, per 1 lakh childbirths, 130 mothers die. Next, please. Death of children below 5 years per 1,000 births in India is 93. Middle income countries 39 and affluent countries 7. So there's a huge difference. Only 40% children are inoculated. Malnutrition in India is 30 to 40% in women and children. India should spend at least 5% of GDP on healthcare, according to the World Health Organization, and at least 3% according to many experts. Minimum 3, but 5 desirable. Next. Now in 1985, we spent 1.3%. So it was before, it was the Congress's time. 2004, we spent 2004 to 5, I think the figure was missing. So there's something wrong here. Now 2018, it was less than 1.3%. 2020, it is 1.6%. But as we still have not even reached 2%, by the way. And defense, we spend 2.1% of GDP on defense. Only 0.5 out of the money that we spend, by the way, we need to spend 5% of our GDP on healthcare. But we spend hardly 1.3, 1.5%. Out of that, half, there is only 0.5 might reach due to corruption. So only half might actually be reaching. In 1990 to 2008, expenditure of affluent countries on healthcare increased from 5% to 7% of GDP. This is by government expenditure, by the way. And in 2017, it became 10%. And we are at 1.3 and 1.5%. Next, please. Indian government spends $16 per capita per year. American government spends $4,802 and British government spends $3,500 per capita per year. In 2018, healthcare expenditure as percentage GDP of countries: Sweden 9.2%, America 8.5%, France 8.7%, UK 7.9%, Denmark 8.7%, Italy 6.7%, Switzerland 8.5%. These are rich countries. Now, what about BRICS? South Africa 4.24%, Russia 3.89%, Brazil 3.89%, China 3.19%, India around 1.3%. So that is the next, please. In the list of countries spending on healthcare by the government, by the way, India ranks 178th, 171st out of 175 countries. I think we should be ashamed of this. In India, 73% of total health expenses are borne by individuals, rest provided by the government. In most other countries, 80% expenses are borne by the government and 20% by individuals. Next. Facts in Lancet. Yearly about 2 lakh deaths by malaria, 3 lakh by TB, etc. Next. Next, please. No, this is important. This is very, very important. You will understand why in COVID we are suffering so much. Doctors per 10,000 in India 8, Sri Lanka 11, China 20, other countries 25 to 30. That is 3 times. Hospital beds per 10,000 population, India 5, China and other countries 25 to 30. That is 6 times. Consultants per 1 lakh, India 0.3, America, by consulting psychological consultants, India 0.3, America 12.4, Norway 26.69. Psychiatrists, patient to doctor, India 1.1 to 55,000 to 63%. We need 50 to 100, not percent, 50 to 100 times more are required by the psychiatrists. Next, please. Sub-centers, our health sub-centers, only 38% are have capable staffs and medicines. Only 20% of telephones, 30% don't have beds, and so on and so forth. I have a list. Next. I'm leaving this so you can go through it later. But many of these hospitals face shortage of water and electric supply. According to this is repetition. Next, please. Healthcare is getting expensive day by day. As we know, even in COVID, for instance, the treatment of COVID runs into lakhs, as we all know. There are 5-star hospitals that are increasing, many 5-star hospitals are built on leased or lands which are given to them on almost zero or very negligible rent, by the way. Many diseases, including mental problems, obesity, heart problems, the diabetes are increasing, but there is no increase in hospitals to tackle these problems. So, this we have taken. Next, please. Education. Now, in education, there's a lot of slides which we don't have time right now, but the last point is important. See, let's go to the second point. In India, about 26% are illiterate, but out of remaining 74%, 23 left school early. School is completed only by 15.7% of our people. Graduates are 4.5%, and postgraduates only 1.1% of population. Now, last point is very important. 40% of 15 to 18 years old girls out of school. And why? Because 65% because of household work. Women contribute to 18% of GDP and 23% of labor participation, which is the lowest in the world. 85% of women's work is unpaid. And if we educate all the women and allow them to work, it could add to $770 billion by 2025 if girls are educated, according to McKinsey's report. Next, please. Now, what is the situation of our schools, by the way? 42%. This is government schools. There are obviously 5-star schools and colleges, as we know. They take a lot of money and there are lakhs of rupees that are required and so on and so forth. But the remaining government schools, which are aplenty and which are maximum, 42% schools didn't have compound, 45% schools didn't have a separate room for headmaster, 40% schools didn't have electricity, 13% schools didn't have sufficient water supply, 18% schools didn't have a library, 95% schools didn't have a librarian, 40% schools didn't have a playground, 72% schools didn't have a computer. Out of remaining 40% were not working, only 9.5% had internet. Now, we're talking about online education and so on, so I thought I'll give you this. Next. Next, please. 72% schools didn't have labs. Around 47% schools didn't have clean toilets. 44% schools didn't have toilets for girls, and so on and so forth. I mean, we can just go on like this. Next, please. 52% of fifth standard students, and this was the quantity. Now, what about quality? 52% of fifth standard students were not able to read second standard textbooks. 49% fifth standard students were not able to do two-digit math, and so on. Next, please. Now, government should spend 6% of GDP according to Kothari Commission 1966, and in 2012-13 we spent 3.1%. 17-18 it fell to 2.7%, and now we are actually spending 3 days back. The news came that we are now going to spend 6% of GDP on education, and I think we all must welcome it. The only thing is we must insist that it should be executed and spend it well, without corruption. It should actually go to modernize our schools, pay our teachers, ASHA workers, and several hundreds and thousands of our teachers are not paid, by the way. So we must pay our teachers. I mean, it's such a shame that there are so many illiterate people and we have teachers who are unemployed. I mean, there are many graduates who are unemployed who could be put to work to teach hundreds and thousands of people. So I think it's like electricians and electrical engineers being unemployed, and there are thousands of villages which actually need electrification. So this dilemma is, there are so many roads to be built, there are so many things to be done with the civil engineers, and there are several other workers are unemployed. So the point is, this economy creates this kind of dichotomy. Now, Brazil spends 5.8% of GDP on education. South Africa spends 6% of GDP. America 5.5, UK 6.2, and we have been spending 3.5, 2.8, and so on, which is miserable. Now there's some ray of hope. I think 6% has been announced. We must make sure that it is spent. Next, please. Now, why are we, why do we lag behind in scientific research? Now, there's a lot of reasons, but just last two slides, last two lines. Only 1% of GDP is reserved for scientific research, by the way. China spends 1.9%, America 2.75% of GDP, and there are several other countries which spend much less. See, in every count, if you go to the details, why we are lagging behind. Next, please. Many of our students don't know what is a laboratory. 72% of schools cannot afford a laboratory. Number of scientists per 10 lakh population. Number of scientists per 10 lakh population, America and Britain 79, Russia 58, China 18, Brazil 14, Chile 7, Kenya 6, and India 4. Next. Number of patents per 10 lakh, this is official data. Number of patents per 10 lakh, that is 1 million population. America 10 lakh to 910, Germany 2288, Japan 3716, South Korea 4451, China 541, Brazil 34, India 17. Next. I'm just giving you this so that all our notions of superpower are actually brought down to reality. Now, Global Innovation Index, GII, position of India in 141 countries. 2011 we were 62nd, 2012 we were 68, and 2018 we are 81st. And I must tell you that in the GII of other countries, America is 6, Japan 13, China 17, Brazil 33, and UAE 37. Innovation Index. That is how much research goes on, how many laboratories, how many people, etc. Education level, and so on. China was, in fact, China is 14th now, by the way, and India is 5th. India has improved. In fact, India also is now 52nd, but there's a huge difference. Next, please. Next. Now, the government spending has to increase in this, and we don't have time to go through all this, but basically in EU, the government spends 29.5%. OECD is 21.9%, South Africa 19%, India is 5% on social sectors. That is healthcare, education, and all that. We spend 5%. And I must mention here, this is very important. South Korea, we all sitting on dining table. Most of the middle class think about, oh, look at what South Korea has done. Look at what Taiwan has done. Look at what Japan has done. Please understand that all these countries, Japan, South Korea, China, in fact, China, because of the period between 1949 to 79, when they started opening up, all these countries, Europe, America, China, South Korea, all these countries have spent huge amount of money on education, healthcare, and most of the stuff, by the way, that I've talked about, electrification, roads, and so on. Even in China today, 95% of villages are covered by really good roads. Villages also. It's not just 8-lane flyovers and all that. Electrification means there's an uninterrupted electric supply. That is very important. We can't just keep fighting China by just throwing some toys here and there. I mean, I don't like China because they're not on our land and they're aggressors. So it's not a question of justifying China at all, but we must understand why they have gone ahead. One of the reasons is electricity is, there's no problem of electricity failures and so on, or far less, I must say. I know, and there were case studies actually, a couple of people after anti-China frenzy, they started, in fact, they said, well, let's produce something locally, of in self-reliance and so on. They started producing near Delhi somewhere. And they said, suddenly there was no electricity. And therefore we could not produce further. And then they became, in fact, distributors of Chinese goods. This has happened in two cases. So electricity, roads, healthcare, and education. Unless we have, capable, educated, healthy class, we invest in research, we invest in all this infrastructure, physical and social infrastructure for the next 20 years. We are not going to compete anywhere. Forget superpower and all that. I mean, that is absolute complete nonsense. This is a myth that is created at 9 o'clock debates on television screens. I'm sure all these statistics that this is never told to you. The main reason why we are lagging behind is because we have not invested in our basic infrastructure. And infrastructure does not necessarily mean flyovers and eight-lane bridges. Infrastructure means all that I have said up to now. Anyway, next, please. I'll skip those. Many people say that our government is very fat, and therefore, we should actually reduce government. We should increase the private, etc. But that's all completely wrong, because our government is, in fact, not very fat. And these are statistics which actually show that India's government employees is 1.3%, and in all the other countries it's much higher of the total employment. Next, please. Of total population, I think. Take the percentage of police per 1 lakh population. Brazil is 193, and everybody, India is 133. Russia 564, China 445, South Africa 316, America 226, we 1. Next, please. Now, even number of judges are very less and so on. Now, there are many people who say, where will we get the money from? Again, at 9 o'clock debates, we will increase the fiscal deficit because of this. Now, fiscal deficit actually means that government expenditure, whatever government spends, minus the government income. Government income mainly comes from taxes. There are other ways also, but government expenditure, whatever government spends, minus whatever government earns, that is fiscal deficit. If it spends more than it earns, fiscal deficit is positive, obviously. How does it get that extra money? There are multiple ways, by printing notes to borrowing internally and internationally, etc. But we won't go into that economics right now. But fiscal deficit, after neoliberalism, after IMF and World Bank and WTO had put a restriction that you cannot increase fiscal deficit more than 3% of your GDP. In 2004, I think we in fact enacted a rule called FRBM, which said that we will not increase our fiscal deficit more than 3% of our GDP. Why? Because if we increase our fiscal deficit, apparently inflation increases, and therefore it has an impact on share prices, and interest rates and so on. I won't go into that, but that will involve a detailed discussion about economics. But and that has in fact been questioned, by the way, that inflation causes fiscal deficit causes inflation has been questioned in 1931 by Kahan, an economist who was in fact a disciple of Keynes, and he said that so long as there's no full employment and there's fiscal deficit, it need not necessarily create inflation. It can, but it need not necessarily create inflation if there's no full employment. But that's a separate discussion we won't go into. So my opinion is that actually fiscal deficit we need not restrict to 3%, can actually go up. You will be surprised to know that right now in America, the fiscal deficit is 20% of GDP, 20%. There are many, because of COVID obviously, but many countries have huge amount of fiscal deficit right now. We are still sticking to 3, 4, 5, and of course our fiscal deficit also has gone up to 7, 8%. But in America, there's 20% right now. But fiscal deficit will not necessarily create inflation is one thing we need to understand. But that's the argument which is actually given to us all the time at 9 o'clock debates, to say we must reduce the government expenditure. And where should we reduce the government expenditure? Therefore, healthcare and education and several other things that we saw just now, including electrification. You know what is the definition of electrification? Electrifying a village. When we say village is electrified, means only 10% of households have electricity. Then we say we call that village electrified. This is from several years ago. It's not just last 6 years. This is the definition of electrification of village, which I think is completely wrong. So basically, even roads, electricity, cheap, affordable, but durable houses, for instance, the public transportation. I think these are the things that we need to healthcare, education, and these 4 or 5 things are what I call as infrastructure. I think unless we create a huge, really good, solid infrastructure in the next 20 years, create a healthy, educated working class, middle class, create a research-oriented structure, distribute our industries, small and medium-scale industries, not just driven by a few corporates, and there's a huge amount of inequality. Create employment-oriented policies and not just sort of go after GDP, because as I've said, only 10% GDP creates 1% employment. So this requires a different way of thinking altogether. The current way of thinking which the world has adopted, and the same kind of story actually repeats in America and England and everywhere else. Now, apart from the fact that fiscal deficit can be increased, my thesis is it need not be increased at all, because if you increase the government revenue, then you need not increase the fiscal deficit, because the fiscal deficit is government's whatever government spends minus government earning. If you increase the government earning, how can you increase the government earning? One is tax. Are we taxing high? Most of the people again at 9 o'clock debate say, oh, you can't increase more because we'll lose our incentive to produce. But that is a complete nonsense. And it will require a detailed discussion, which I will leave right now. But just give you some statistics. Tax to GDP ratio of Brazil. What is the percent of GDP that you tax? Brazil is 35.6%. South Africa is 28.8%. OECD is 34%. UK 35.2%. EU is 40.69%. America is 24.3%. India is 16.6%. So there's a huge scope for increase in taxes. Next, please. Now, which taxes should we increase? There's a direct tax and indirect tax. Direct tax always reduces inequality. Because if your income is more, then your taxes are more, and therefore it reduces inequality. Indirect tax in fact increases inequality. If I buy a shoe and there is 15% tax, 1,000 rupees shoe is actually, I'll have to pay 150 rupees. But I will have to pay 150 rupees on 1,000 rupees shoe, and a rich man also will have to pay the same. Though the money is same, the proportion of that money as compared to my income is far more for poorer people. Therefore, indirect tax always increases inequality, and therefore is what is called regressive. The direct tax is progressive because it actually reduces the inequality, and therefore we need to, if we have a huge amount of inequality, point number one, we need to increase the taxes. Point number two, we need to increase the direct taxes. What is our proportion of direct taxes to full taxes? The proportion of direct taxes from all total taxes In India is 30%. In Indonesia is 55.85%. South Africa 57.5%. OECD is very high. Europe is 70%. Russia is 24.3%. So what is, I mean, this is ridiculous. So our taxes should be high, and it should be direct tax should be high, because we are one of the lowest in the world. And this is in fact decreasing. Direct to full taxes percentage in 2009 was 61%, 13-14 was 56%, 17-18 was 52%. So direct tax as a proportion of the total tax is in fact decreasing. So we have a huge area of improvement. Next, please. Next, please. I won't talk about tax havens, but there are various ways in which wealthy people can avoid tax, which we need to catch: Mauritius, Singapore, and so on. Anyway, there are 4 areas where we can increase the government revenue. One is increase taxes on wealthy people, increase direct taxes, wealth tax, and inheritance tax. By the way, there is no wealth tax and inheritance tax in India. In 2011, when there was Occupy Wall Street movement in America because of inequality and so on, I'm sure most of you must know that. And there were 85 cities where lakhs of people used to just go to the city center, downtown, and have a dharna. And so basically, it was Bill Gates, it was Warren Buffett, and several people actually went to the president and said, please increase our wealth and inheritance tax. Because I think unless you do that, we won't reduce inequality. They have the guts to say that. I'm not saying they're very, very good and they're humanitarian in all aspects, but they knew that if they don't sort of part with the wealth that they have, at least partially, it will be terrible. How many people in India? I mean, if there is a discussion about increase in tax or wealth tax and inheritance tax, at 9 o'clock debates again, all the people who actually basically are corporate economists actually immediately say no, but that will reduce the desire to produce and so on and so forth. Increase expenses on education, healthcare, increase investments in SMEs and agriculture. Next, please. Climate change. I'll talk only for 5 minutes because one of the reasons that I want to tell you, I've talked about cities, for instance, is because of a concentrated or centralized development paradigm. What is development paradigm? Development paradigm is what we produce, for whom we produce, where we produce, with what technology we produce, is what is important. And who decides about all this? In all this, the decision is made by big corporates. They basically produce in all cities, partially a little bit in villages and some areas that are created, SEZs, etc., which are mostly vacant. But essentially, they're basically in several centralized areas. They are not dispersed. They use technology which is enormously high because of globalization to be competitive in the world. They are forced to use technology, which is why when GDP increases by 10%, employment increases only by 1%. Then what they produce is only consumer goods, which are basically luxury consumer goods mainly, and all the rest is led to small and medium scale industries. All the stuff that is used by poor and middle class or low middle class people, farmers, and so on. But most of the corporates actually produce hundreds of not just shampoos and soaps and soft drinks and tiles and ACs and fridges and so on, but they produce at a place which is centralized and using technology which is quite automated, and therefore employment in such industries can be given only to people who are educated. A person from Konkan or from a village who is not educated cannot be employed in such industries, because you read NC machine or robots and all that kind of stuff, high-end machinery you have to operate and so on, and they're not sort of capable of doing that. And I think therefore there is an enormous amount of the way we develop the whole question of enormous emphasis only on GDP, and therefore production, What are you producing? Where are you producing? Why are you producing? For whom are you producing? With what technology? I think this is the most important question. This is pre-COVID, by the way. And I think we did not pay attention to that, and that's why the climate change issue started really bothering us. In Delhi, you couldn't even see 1 foot away. I mean, there's a huge problem in cities. I'm not. I mean, I can just talk about climate change for 3 hours, but I'll wind up in 5-10 minutes maximum. But just to give you some idea, greenhouse gases, it's called ppm, particles per million. Before industrial revolution, it was 280, 205, 379, then 379, 400, 406, and 2019 is 413. By the way, most of the people say that when it reaches a figure of even 450, it will be a terrible time. All this gives rise to higher temperature. When temperature rises, ice melts, and actually that comes to the sea, and the sea level increases. When sea level increases, there'll be floods on the coastal lines, and that will destroy lakhs of lives in years to come. And that's not very far off. Many, 20, 30 years ago, people used to think that, oh, maybe in a couple of centuries that might happen. And who knows what's going to happen after 200-300 years. Nobody has patience to wait for 200-300 years. Nobody has even lifespan to wait for 200-300 years anyway. But now we're thinking about a few decades. We're thinking about like 30, 50, 70 years. In this century, lakhs and crores of people are going to die and are going to be displaced. And I think that is very serious. Next, please. Next, how methane is increasing, nitrates are increasing. Cyclones, the second frequency of cyclones increased by 50% between 1990 to 2004. Now, all this happens because of climate change, has been established absolutely beyond doubt by IPCC and thousands of scientists all over the world. There are obviously some people who are doubters, who actually cast aspersions about whether this is due to climate change, because of the industrial waste that goes into rivers, and because of the carbon dioxide that is actually emitted because of the industries and cars and so on. Carbon proportion increases in the air, and which is why there's climate change, and which is why there's an enormous amount of impact on rains, which have become, as you know, as we speak, in fact, the rain timings of rain, the amount of rain, and period of rain, and even the where it rains is going to change, is changing rapidly in our lifetimes. In the last 5-10 years, if you notice, suddenly there's an enormous amount of pouring showers, and then there is drought suddenly next year. I think the point is that the climate is completely you cannot unpredictable, and therefore the crises of climate have started increasing. From 1998, every year was the hottest than the previous year. Then 1999 was the hottest. Then 2000 was hottest. And this is continuing until 2020, by the way. The sea level increased by so much, and then it's increasing, it increased 1.35 mm, and now the rate is 2.5 times higher per year. Next, please. Biodiversity is decreasing, etc. We can go into the details. Next. Extinction rate speed is increased from centuries to 50 years now. 50% of wetlands, 33% of mangroves, forests, 90% of fish species, more than 20% of corals destroyed. More than half of tropical and temperate forests destroyed. I must tell you that if you see the official figures, they will tell you that afforestation has taken place. Forests have been destroyed because of our lifestyle, because we need wood, furniture, 100 crores of houses that are built for middle class, and there's furniture and there's paper. And so there are hundreds of things about why need paper, all the boxes, all the cartons and so on and so on. So there are lakhs and crores of trees which are actually cut every day in Amazon and several other forests. But the official figure says that afforestation is taking place. But afforestation never can replace, has not replaced the loss of thick forests, by rainforests, as they say. It has been shown and proven that they are not as good to create, to kill the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So basically, it gives us to monoculture, because you're not, how is the forest counted? From the satellites there are pictures. So long even there's monoculture the greenery, then you can obviously see that there is a forest. So that's how the forestation is measured. But it is not very good for climate control, because it is not killing or absorbing the carbon dioxide which it should. So that's the whole point. Next, please. In India, death due to pollution 3,400 per day or 2.5 per minute. These are official data. 25% of child deaths due to polluted water. Use of open toilets is only 50%. Probably has, this is last year's statistics. Productivity of between 15 to 20 age group is decreased by 44% due to pollution, because of illnesses and because of hundreds of other problems, the drugs and medicines. And so this is measured, and the productivity is decreased by 44%. Next, please. 30% part, in fact, because of the climate, whatever money that we need to spend on health, because of the health issues, because of climate change, because of, in order to purify the rivers, and not just Ganges, but various other things, the money that we actually waste is so much that we should actually reduce 30% part of our GDP due to climate change. That is what the official recommendation is. From world's 15 countries, India stands 14th in the management of climate change, and so on. So I think, next. Again, more than 10 microgram dust particles are dangerous. Beijing, which is very high, is 142. Delhi is 115. Calcutta is 110. All these are 10 times than what is permissible over there. And I've used statistics of sulfur dioxide, and so I mean we're just living through a hell because of the way we produce, because the way we not just have the rules have been laxed, but I think more importantly the way we produce itself. Next. Because we must understand that more automation means more energy, and more energy means more oil or coal or whatever, and that essentially means more carbon dioxide. So on the one hand, you had actually Gandhiji's charkha, where you could think about no automation at all, and uh, tremendous employment but low productivity. On the other hand, huge automation and very high productivity but low employment but tremendous pollution. What we need to do is to figure out what is the best for India in terms of employment, in terms of control of pollution, in terms of creating, as I've said, the social and physical infrastructure to actually push forward and reduce inequality and make sure that the growth or whatever benefits that the economy actually gives rise, make sure we have, is actually percolates to the sectors which are down below. Now, just a couple of last minutes. With COVID, all this is aggravated until either herd immunity is created, or there is a vaccine, and I don't see that happening at least for 1 year. Both of these, at least for 1 year from now. After that also, we'll probably, the economy will start finding feet somehow, and therefore for the next 2 to 3 years, I think we'll struggle to actually come back to normalcy. Please understand that even if you are cured of COVID, there have been cases that people who are cured of COVID are not essentially cured of all the diseases, because they are now reported. KEIM Hospital actually yesterday reported that they're coming back with other ailments. So it's a very different kind of virus. We're fighting with it. American economy, in fact, is going absolutely to doldrums. I can't even, because the main thing is American economy in order to save, as I've said, as I began in 1930s, American government spent a lot of money to put the money in the hands of the people to create demand and so on. In the same way, government in 2008 gave huge amount of bailout package of $770 billion. But what they did actually is not put that money in the hands of the people. They put partial money in the hands of the people. But most of the money went to banks and corporates. The government bought their bonds, for instance, or government reduced in today also government has reduced interest rates, made it almost zero, which is why most of the banks and corporates are borrowing money at zero interest rates, or government is actually giving them a lot of money. And using that money, they're buying small companies, and therefore monopolies are increasing, inequalities are increasing, and that money they're putting in the share market, and therefore share market is booming in America. Economy is going to dogs, but government is giving far more money to corporates and banks than to common people, and therefore they're putting that money in the share market, not only there but also Indian and other share markets. Therefore, you see world over the economies are going to dogs, but the share market is booming, and this is ridiculous. The real option to the government, and even our government, and we said we've given a 20 crore package, 20 lakh crore package, which is 10% of GDP, but the actual spending was far less. My suggestion is that we should increase the spending of the government, actually put the money in the hands of the people. And while doing that, if we do what Germany and UK also did, if we put the money in the hands of small and medium scale industries and say, I'll give you money, but based on the fact that you give money to the workers, we'll not only stop this migration crisis, but we'll save SMEs in a big way. I think that is the key. That short term, of course, long term key is, as I said, create a huge amount of social infrastructure, spend, and not just quality quantity, but also improve the quality in healthcare, education, roads, electricity, durable and cheap housing, and affordable of the public transportation. I think if we could do this for the next 20 years, rather than talking about how many tanks we have and how many planes we have and how many flyovers we have and superpower and that kind of thing, if we do this for the next 20 years, we'll create a really solid economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Godovale sir, for your nice presentation and a very excellent speech. I think this speech is eye-opening to all the stakeholders in the society. Godbole sir has covered many issues in his speech, especially economic inequality, different school thoughts, new liberal capitalism, SMSI and banking role, unemployment rate, labor market participation rate, climate change, health issues, education issues, issues of restructuring socio-economic system. And I think that this is the issues where that the government and the policymakers should work. As a part of our webinar, I think that we have received 34 questions and we sent all the questions to Godbole sir. And I think that all the questions has covered in their speech and in their talk. So there is no any separate question to ask you, sir. But I think I'm sure these questions or the participants, those who ask the questions, all they are satisfied with your presentation. I think this speech is beyond the questions. I think which questions are asked. I think the many issues you have covered in the speech, and I'm sure your speech will helpful for the new researchers, academicians, and policymakers also. Now I'm turned to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Madam. She is also economics discipline, and we are interested to listen her also. I request to Honorable Vice Chancellor, Madam, for your presidential speech.
Yeah, thank you, Kamre sir. And our guest speaker today, Mr. Godbole sir, and all the participants, those who are present, and most of them are from different states as well as from different countries. So I welcome you all. So we have heard a very comprehensive and all inclusive sort of matter given by Mr. Godbole, he has covered the wide canvas of our economy. And what I can see that right from economic crisis, from Great Depression to the present system of COVID, you have tried to cover everything. So thank you very much for this very lively presentation. I would like to put some of the comments like you have started with Great Depression. That is very right. I'm a little bit afraid that things, if we'll go like this, we are watching all this COVID data and all health ministries giving and everything. So I'm afraid that will it be something more dangerous than Great Depression? So that's why when we are talking about the choice between lives and livelihoods. So I think we have started this livelihood matter. Why? That it should not be like this very high depression and some matter should go away with the economy always. But still there is a possibility that it should not go in minus in many countries, even for India also, in many other countries, which is like SARC countries as well as the countries which are like emerging countries in the economy. It is always dangerous that we should work very rightly from the point of view of livelihood issues. Now, about coming about the inequalities, which you have given the sort of a lot of data, I would like to draw attention of all the participants that Financial Express, even some of the you can say government data has given that inequality has increased more in women and as well as the unorganized sectors. We are having the population of 48.04% women are there. And how many are working? Women are there, and how many are getting employment out of it? That is a big question. So they are not even half, they are less than that. Only 19 point say something 8% women are really getting you can say the moderate salary or better salary, but others are really sufferers. Even we have seen when they're preparing some PPEs and masks and all those issues in this COVID system, they are getting less amount when they are working equally with the men. So this is the problem of the inequality among the women. So I think that point has to be targeted because very important. This has come also in the Financial Express of today. That one of the their article is covering on that. Then another part is unorganized sector. That is all migrants you have covered in that. But 78.2% unorganized sector is there. And wherever I'm going, the people are always asked that can we convert the unorganized sector into organized sector? So it's a very difficult question because again, policy makers and all these people, those who are working for development of economy, if they have to think upon the informal sector, unorganized sector, the problem is very really difficult. And we cannot answer in a one sentence that they will be converted into organized sector. Organized sector is also having its own problem, but at least they are having sufficient money in their hand. But what about the unorganized sector, which is in the tune of 78.2%? Then another thing which is been rightly said about the Manrega and MSME. Atmanirbhar Bharat can change the situation. I think we are all hopeful. Again, the tag has to be put that proper implementation of issues must be there. Otherwise, it is very difficult. Policies can be very good. We are doing it right from 1950s. Policies are wonderful. But when it is coming into the ground reality, a lot of things we have to consider. And therefore, MSMEs should be regenerated. It should not be closed down because the problem of closure is more. We have seen in the last figures that most of the small scale industry has closed down because of so many reasons. Another important thing is Manrega is a temporary situation, temporary solution, I should say. But if you want to go with a permanent solution or the long run policy we have to follow, then Manrega has to become a very strong, robust sort of activity, and it should be covering most of the employment issues. That will be the important part. But what I would like to say that COVID has entered when high developed economies are entering in the robotics, they are entering in the machine learning, all high level IT fields, and suddenly they have to stop because of this COVID. So we can say a big hurt for them. But if that could have been done more inequality will could have been increased, or rather it is already increasing as your statistic says, but it could have been increased more, because when you're replacing people because of machines and robots and all that, that has become a problem. So all these issues are related to the system of all developed and developing countries. But it is very true, there is no free trade or the free production system or the free issues which has been coming in the economy. Many people has termed as a free wheel economy. So some wheels you can have a free movement in the system, and that can be very good for the development of economy. But it has never happened. A very comprehensive and good write-up, or rather a book, has been given by Thomas Piketty about the inequality just a few years back. And he has also given one important thing which I like very much, that multinational corporations are really getting stronger and stronger, and because of all these issues which we are going through with the data and all that, maybe the globalization is there. Some people are saying some deglobalization is also happening. So middle class is the sufferer, or the poor people are the sufferer. But again, this is the question, that this neo-globalization is again not proving good for many people. Multinational corporations are grabbing out all the profits. They are entering in small areas like toothbrush, preparation of small pencils, pen, and all that. Is that need of entering in that area? So I think one good point I can see in the Atmanirbhar Bharat, that at least the investment of industries of 200 crores, that can be restricted for multinational corporations if it is implemented well. Some hopes for small scale industries is possible. But about the situation which we are thinking, that what COVID will do in couple of years or couple of months, I should say. So this new normal term has come. Of course, we know that nothing was much very healthy or good or normal earlier, but now also it has been deteriorated a lot. But there is always possibility that some jobs which are related to the computer section, education system, online, they have a pretty good platform to develop. I think COVID has given us a big platform that at least we should learn out of this and now come up with some of the innovative ideas. And I think that will, if taken care well, then there is a possibility that these challenges can come up in at least 10%, 20% improvement. We can think about it. Then about the losing job, I remember when Manmohan Singh was our prime minister. That time the contract-based job, all the system has been entered, and now it has come with the word gig economy. So that is the contract system we are giving to the most of the areas. Even the most pitiable thing that is entered in the education system, that we are employing contract-based teachers, we are employing contract-based educators. So that has become a problem, because anything which is very important, like education, you have said very rightly, that is the base of the any economy. And in that, this gig economy is entering in the way that you have to work, get pay, and go off. So this will not going to become a very strong pillar for any economy, especially not like India. Then whatever the system which we are going through related to the IT sector, or as you have also said about the 8 big cities, they have concentrated because of IT, the personnel and the improvement done in that areas. That is sort of an oligopoly system which we has been taken up, I should say. The concentration in few cities, and they are highly dominating. But we are, I think, somewhere copying, or we are getting some ideas from United States or the European countries. I can cite an example of America, where all motor industries like GM Motors, they have literally formed a oligopoly, and they have not allowed the public transport to enter in the system. So everyone can buy a car, they can have a big profit, and public transport is not necessary. So that has become a big power of the this car manufacturer. If it is happening in a developed country, and they are also facing a lot of problems, what I will see that our emerging country, we can say, or the developing country we have, that is a big problem we are going to face in coming years, because this type of system will only going to have a good impact on few people, not to many people. Then again, one thing which is very important about the education, that when we are as a universities, when we are framing our policies, we can say there's a lot of dropouts at 12th standard, and most of the dropout are the girl students. That is all the social system. So what we have to say, the all system which we have to run, or we have to move ahead with, that is the social system, social background we need to understand and improve upon it. Otherwise the old things will be there, they will be the existent, and we have to improve some few things. Again, the inequality in the social system will happen, and that will give again boost to the income inequality. So that should not happen. So all these things has to be redefined or reset up from the point of view of giving strength to the government schools, government colleges, and the universities, because then only the proper monitoring, if it has been done, the social audit, if we can do, then I think these changes are possible. Then drastic changes we have seen in the COVID PT situations we are facing. In this context, I would like to say this is the not only because of COVID, I should say, even the pre-COVID, even the post-COVID, we have to think lot of things. Like, I have seen some Delhi students went to our Prime Minister, and they said they have made a figure, and it has been written 9 is mine. So what is this 9? 9 is 6% in education and 3% in health. So this is mine, means this is our GDP ratio, and you should spend for us. This is the message has been given to our Prime Minister. So if the people are asking our policymakers, our leaders, to frame a good infrastructure, basic infrastructure, I think policymakers and all, they should think on these lines. Yes, this education policy has given a very good, you can say, the setup of 6% spending of GDP on education. Hopefully, all things go well, proper implementation, proper policy system will go ahead. Then it will be definitely very, very good step for getting good education system. Then again, you have raised about some electrification and all that, because we have done research long back, say like 20 years or 25 years back. In that, the issue of electrification, even the road building, that time roads were very horrible. Now it has been improved a lot. So that is a good thing in the economy which is coming. And I think it has added 2.34% to the GDP, because all system has been regenerated because of the good roads. If similarly, electrification, education, health, all will improve. Gradually, it will increase the potential, and GDP can be increased. But would like to tell you the example which we have seen 24, 25 years back, that in Yavatmal, there is a place in Yavatmal in Vidarbha, where we were, some research project was there, and we need to identify how many villages are electrified. When we were passing through a village, it has been said that it is electrified. The board was given that it is electrified. So we entered inside. We thought every house must be having some electricity. They must be having pump to get the water and all that. But it has been told that on the highway there are 2, 3 bulbs has been given, so it has electrified. So if this is a malpractice, and if it is happening in India like this, that has become a really very important to think about the development issues, development paradigms, and all these important things are there. Now, coming to the climate change areas, yes, greenhouse emissions and all these things which has been taking liberty by the developed countries is a really difficult situation. Even earlier CFC gas, chlorofluorocarbon, and all that. These are the issues which we have. We are saying that we are moving to the improvement side, but still the problem of climate is still there. We are getting all type of rains which are not even useful for the farmers, but not for the drinking and all that. So this is always a question that how this climate change will going to hamper. Some questions I have also got regarding the climate change. At the end, I will just try to answer on this. But the questions are very important because of this manthan, I should say. We are doing it from last 3 days. So we should take home some issues like that. Is the GDP is the correct measurement for all economic system, or we should have a different parameters and different issues, or some alternatives can be find for better living or the healthy living. Even we are also tried here in the Solapur University to go for happiness index. One report has come from my colleague, but is related to good car and good house, and still we are unhappy. Then where is our happiness lies? So that is all the question, that what we are doing it for the men or human being, that is a big question. So therefore, I would like to say that can we go for those thinking, that simple living and simple thinking, can be this alternative thing or something. We need to talk upon this, because the debate can go a long way, but this is the very important thing. Then when we need to say to save our mother earth, how mother earth can be useful for us. I think COVID has given also one eye opener thing, that we should save our mother earth. We are not the single species on the earth that we can dominate the all natural resources. And therefore, if we are making Tesla car like on the battery operated system, then it is very, very necessary that how petrol and other things we can be utilized in a very moderate way, or it cannot be, if you are not getting that those type of resources, what will be the future. So even same about the birds and flora fauna, is the most of the things has gone in the red alert data system. So all these things we need to really study. This is the idea for all of thinkers, even the students, teachers, and educators, that we have to think on these lines. That's why this type of arrangements has been done. Now the last part, which I'll like to cover about the questions. We got questions from various participants, and the issue of migration is of more concern, which I have said. Some issues has been definitely taken up by the previous speaker, but yes, migration is because we have not developed the rural economy well, and that's why the migration was heavy. Now we have seen the reverse migration, the U-turn was there. And if the livelihood improve, can there be again migration towards the cities? So where the problem is solved. Yes, but for migration, we should have a robust rural system, rural villages. Can we have the urban amenities, sort of urban amenities in rural areas? All these things will be there, and again the policy makers can become very, very much aligned to such areas where we need to think on these lines. Then about the tribal and indigenous issues, there is a question, and I think that is asked by some foreign participants also. Yes, there is an issue. I have worked with the Meghat people in Vidarbha as well as in Gadchiroli. I have also worked with the Beed people, which is very near to Solapur. In those areas, we have seen the mainstream, the lifeline issues has not reached to them. So even if the COVID is there, they may be thinking that this will going to harm us, or whatever the thing will come, they will going to harm us, because they are not having full idea about it. They are not educated. They are not having all these comforts with them. They are happy with whatever the way they are living. I have seen in various places where the extensions of these tribal has been done, because we are preparing for some dam or some road, and they have been asked, forced for migration to the different areas. When we asked the question, they said we are very happy in the villages. We are very happy in the forest areas. Why you are asking us to go ahead? Whatever we are getting for 2 times food or 3 times food and all that, we are happy. So what is their problem is again policy system. We have to think, can we just force them to put in the modern system? That is really not good. Even rather, what we can learn from them, that is also the issue we have to think. Because in many places, like in Africa, in some of the places in Australia, they have tried to do it. So I think that is also the way we have to think, because they are also the important part of our system. And other questions are also related to the climate change, which is, can we avoid climate changes and all that? Yes, we can avoid, but we have to train ourselves, especially in India, when we are talking about the Swachhata Abhiyan, cleanliness drive, and all that. We have to change our mind and attitude. Even when we are bringing this new economic policy, only policy cannot change. Our mind has setup has to be changed. Similarly, for climate change, the cleanliness, the proper linkages between the health as well as nature and human kind, we have to tackle all these things with a very set assets or the thinking, which is very very important for us. And very different question is asked by one of our friend from I think Sri Lanka. That is what we can do about the Ayurvedic culture. Yes, I think we are very much talking in our university about naturopathy, Ayurveda, and so many related areas. Yes, it is our culture and it is again related to the nature. So it is a part of climate issues. It is the part of Mother Earth system. So we definitely it can play a big role. It was playing a big role earlier. So I am very much positive about this culture. But how we have to carry it out for betterment, that is again the issue. And when the other issues which is related to health system, which is Ayush Mantralaya is taking very good care of it, I think that has to be taken care. So good that lot of questions has come and students and teachers are involved in that. And I think that all this series will be very very important to understand and have a think tank on this, that how our economy can be driven well, not only by politicians but by the common man also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam, for your nice lecture on different issues. I think Honorable Vice Chancellor Madam has covered human issues, especially unorganized sector, Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, free will economy, environmental issues, education issues, social sector issues, IT related issues, provisions in new education policy. And I think all these issues it will helpful for the new India and for the new generation. I think today is Sunday and so it is a very big and very excellent intellectual treat to the participants and to the audience. And I'm very happy from the both speakers. Now I request to Dr. Dhruv sir to propose vote of thanks of this particular webinar.
Okay, thank you, Dr. G.S. Kamble, sir. Respected dignitaries present over here, Professor Dr. Mrunalali Fadnavis, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Punyashlok Ahilyadevi Holkar, Solapur University, and the President of the today's session. Today's invitee speaker, socialist personality, great economist, writer, and son of the Solapur, respected Sri Achyut Godbole. Professor D.N. Mishra, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor V.B. Gute, Registrar, Professor V.L. Kadam, Dean, Professor G.S. Kamble, Convener, and members of organizing committee, teachers, researcher, media representative, and dear participants from India and abroad. I feel honored and privileged to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of organizing committee of 4 days international webinar series on climate change and rural development in COVID-19, which is jointly organized by School of Earth Sciences and School of Social Sciences, Punyashlok Ahilyadevi Holkar, Solapur University, Solapur. First of all, I would like to propose heartily a vote of thanks to respected Achyut Godbole sir for gracing today's session and delivering the talk on present crisis in economy and ecology. A big thank to you, sir, for wide and very important topic you have discussed today. We are all inspired by your great words. Thank you so much for your session and talk, for your very interesting and thought-provoking talk. Secondly, I am extremely thankful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor Madam for her gracious presence and motivation and her guidance in this webinar session, in this webinar series. I sincerely thankful to Professor D.N. Mishra, Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor, and Professor V.B. Gute for their moral and administrative support for this event. I am very much thankful to Professor G.S. Kamble, convener of this 4 days webinar series, Professor S.S. Suryanshi, Director, School of School of Earth Sciences, member of organizing committee who helped towards successful organization of this today's event. I'm thankful to Dr. S.D. Raut and C.G. Gadi for their technical support and guidance in this session. At the last, I would like to express thanks to all the participants from India and abroad, members of press, media for their presence in the today's session. I thank you one and all. With the permission of authorities, I declare that our day 3 session is over. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much.
Thank you, Godbole sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
sir. छान झालं.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.